December 7th, 1941. The Pacific Ocean was unusually quiet. As the sun slowly rose over Hawaii, thousands of sailors and servicemen at Pearl Harbor believed it would be just another peaceful Sunday morning. The harbor was calm. Battleships rested at anchor while crews carried on with their daily routines. No one knew that in just a few minutes, one of the most devastating attacks in modern history was about to begin. At that very moment, hundreds of miles away, Japanese warplanes were silently closing in on their target, hidden above the clouds. The pilots had already received their orders. Within minutes, the sky would be filled with the roar of aircraft engines. Pearl Harbor would be consumed by flames, and within just a few hours, the United States would find itself fully drawn into the Second World War. But even today, one question continues to spark debate. Was Pearl Harbor truly a complete surprise, or did some people see the disaster coming only to have their warnings ignored? December 7th, 1941. The Pacific Ocean was unusually calm. As the first light of dawn spread across the waters surrounding Hawaii, the naval base at Pearl Harbor slowly came to life. Palm trees swayed gently in the warm morning breeze. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the barracks. Church bells would soon begin ringing across Honolulu. For thousands of American sailors and soldiers, it was simply another peaceful Sunday. Some were still asleep after a long week of duty. Others were shaving in front of small mirrors inside the barracks. Several young sailors sat on the decks of their ships, joking with friends as they watched the sunrise. Letters from home were being opened. Breakfast trays were being prepared. Conversations were filled with ordinary plans. A baseball game later that afternoon. A trip into Honolulu after duty. A letter that needed to be finished before evening. No one believed that, within only a few hours, many of those conversations would never be finished. Thousands of miles away, however, another morning had begun very differently. Far beyond the horizon, hidden by the endless Pacific, one of the most powerful naval strike forces ever assembled was silently moving toward its target. 6 Japanese aircraft carriers, hundreds of warplanes, thousands of sailors, thousands more airmen. Every engine had been carefully maintained. Every bomb had been inspected. Every pilot already knew exactly where he was expected to fly. No radio transmissions, no unnecessary conversation, only silence. The success of the mission depended on remaining invisible for just a little longer. Months earlier, the Japanese Empire had reached a dangerous crossroads. Its military victories across Asia had come at a tremendous cost. Factories demanded more oil. Warships demanded more fuel. Aircraft demanded more gasoline. Yet Japan possessed very few natural resources of its own. Instead, it depended almost entirely on imported supplies. When the United States imposed severe economic sanctions and restricted oil exports, Japanese leaders realized time was no longer on their side. Some believed diplomacy could still prevent war. Others argued that negotiations would only make Japan weaker. Inside Tokyo, heated meetings stretched late into the night. Military officers studied maps. Government ministers debated impossible choices. Every option seemed to carry enormous risk. Among them stood Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Unlike many of his colleagues, Yamamoto understood America's industrial strength better than anyone. He had studied in the United States. He had traveled across the country. He admired its factories, its resources, and its ability to produce weapons on a scale no other nation could match. He knew that if war continued for years, Japan would almost certainly lose. Yet he also believed that if war became unavoidable, Japan's only chance was to strike first, strike hard, strike unexpectedly, and hope that America would lose the will to fight before its full power could be unleashed. The target was obvious: Pearl Harbor, America's most important naval base in the Pacific. Destroy the fleet, cripple the battleships, buy enough time for Japan to expand across Southeast Asia before the United States could recover. It was an extraordinarily bold plan, but it depended on one thing above everything else: complete surprise. For nearly a year, preparations continued in absolute secrecy. Japanese pilots trained relentlessly. Engineers redesigned aerial torpedoes so they could function in Pearl Harbor's shallow waters. Bombs were modified to penetrate the thick steel armor of American battleships. Mock versions of Pearl Harbor were built so pilots could rehearse every stage of the attack. Every flight path was memorized, every target assigned, every second calculated. Nothing was left to chance. As the final days approached, the strike force slipped quietly into the cold waters of the North Pacific. The weather worked in their favor. Heavy clouds concealed their movements. The fleet avoided commercial shipping lanes. Radio silence remained absolute. Back in Hawaii, life continued exactly as it always had. Most Americans had no reason to believe the war in Europe would soon reach the Pacific. Although newspapers reported growing tensions with Japan almost every day, few imagined that an attack could come against American territory itself. Pearl Harbor felt safe, protected by thousands of miles of open ocean, protected by distance, protected by confidence. It was a confidence that would soon be shattered. Before sunrise on December 7th, the Japanese task force reached its launch position roughly 230 miles north of Oahu. The sea remained calm. The wind was light. Conditions were almost perfect. At precisely 6 a.m., the first aircraft rolled across the wooden flight decks. One after another, engines roared to life. Fighter pilots tightened their gloves. Bomber crews made their final instrument checks. Torpedo pilots adjusted their goggles. As each aircraft disappeared into the morning sky, every man aboard understood that history was about to change. None of them knew exactly how the day would end, but every one of them knew there would be no turning back. Far away, the people of Pearl Harbor were only beginning to wake up, and they had absolutely no idea that hundreds of aircraft were already racing toward them across the Pacific sky. The first wave of Japanese aircraft continued flying south through the cool morning air. Below them, the vast Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction. The pilots maintained strict radio silence. No one spoke. There was nothing left to discuss. Months of preparation had led to this single moment. Every pilot knew his assignment. Every bomber crew had memorized its target. Every torpedo pilot understood that the first few minutes of the attack would determine whether the mission succeeded or failed. As the island of Oahu slowly appeared on the horizon, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida looked down from his aircraft. The mountains were exactly where they were supposed to be. The coastline matched every reconnaissance photograph. There was no sign that the Americans suspected anything. The fleet had remained completely undetected. At nearly the same moment, inside a small radar station at Opana Point on the northern coast of Oahu, two young American soldiers were finishing what they believed would be an uneventful training shift. Privates George Elliott and Joseph Lockhart had stayed a little longer than required to practice operating the Army's new SCR-270 radar system. Radar was still a relatively new technology.
Few officers fully understood its capabilities. Just after 7 a.m., an enormous signal suddenly appeared on their screen. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The echo kept growing larger. Dozens of aircraft were approaching the island together. Unsure of what they were seeing, they immediately called the information center. The report reached a young lieutenant who had only recently begun his training. After listening carefully, he believed the radar operators had detected a scheduled flight of American B-17 bombers expected to arrive from the mainland that morning. "There is no need to worry about it," he reportedly replied. The warning went no further. The radar station fell silent once again. Years later, that brief conversation would become one of the most discussed moments in military history. Only a few minutes earlier, everything might have changed. Back above the clouds, the Japanese formation continued its approach. The city of Honolulu came into view. The beaches were peaceful. The roads were quiet. Smoke drifted gently from chimneys as families prepared breakfast. Below, American sailors walked casually across the decks of their ships. Some were raising the morning colors. Others were preparing for Sunday inspection. A few musicians were gathering for the daily flag ceremony. Nothing suggested that war was only moments away. At approximately 7:40 a.m., Commander Fuchida looked through a break in the clouds. The sight below confirmed everything he had hoped to see. The American battleships were lined up neatly along Battleship Row. USS Arizona, USS Oklahoma, USS West Virginia, USS California, USS Nevada. One after another, they rested peacefully beside Ford Island, exactly where Japanese intelligence had predicted. The harbor was full. The element of surprise was complete. Realizing the attack had remained undetected until the very last moment, Fuchida reached for his radio transmitter. His message contained only 3 words: Tora, Tora, Tora. It was one of the most famous radio signals ever transmitted. The code informed Admiral Nagumo that complete tactical surprise had been achieved. The attack could now proceed exactly as planned. Seconds later, Japanese dive bombers separated from the main formation. Torpedo bombers descended to an incredibly low altitude above the water. Fighter aircraft accelerated ahead to suppress American air defenses. The peaceful Sunday morning was about to disappear forever. At 7:48 a.m., the first bombs began falling. A violent explosion shattered the silence near Hickam Field. Within moments, Wheeler Field, Ford Island, and Kaneohe Naval Air Station were also under attack. American aircraft, parked wingtip to wingtip on the ground, became easy targets. One after another, fighters and bombers burst into flames before their pilots could even reach them. The Japanese strategy was working perfectly. Destroy the aircraft before they could take off. Prevent any organized response. Control the skies from the very beginning. Across Pearl Harbor, confusion spread almost instantly. Many sailors initially believed the explosions were part of a military exercise. Others rushed outside expecting to see an accident. Instead, they looked up and saw aircraft bearing the red rising sun painted boldly across their wings. Machine guns opened fire. Bombs continued falling. The sound of exploding ammunition echoed across the harbor. Within less than 5 minutes, the largest American naval base in the Pacific had become a battlefield. The surprise attack that Japanese planners had spent months preparing had achieved exactly what they had hoped. But the worst was still to come. Far out in the harbor, one battleship was about to become the symbol of the entire attack. Its name was USS Arizona.
The first bombs had barely finished exploding when the attack intensified. Japanese aircraft swept across Pearl Harbor in carefully coordinated waves. Dive bombers screamed toward their targets. Torpedo bombers skimmed just above the surface of the water. Fighter aircraft circled overhead, firing relentlessly at anything that moved. Within minutes, thick black smoke covered the harbor. The peaceful blue sky that had greeted the morning was disappearing behind fire and ash. Sirens echoed across the base. Officers shouted orders that were often impossible to hear. Telephone lines were cut. Communications became chaotic. Many soldiers had never experienced combat before. Some ran toward the explosions without helmets. Others searched desperately for ammunition, unsure of where the attack had even begun. Despite the confusion, acts of extraordinary courage appeared everywhere. Sailors climbed aboard burning ships to rescue trapped shipmates. Medical teams transformed cafeterias, hallways, and storage rooms into emergency treatment stations. Firefighters pushed through walls of smoke, knowing that every second could mean another life saved. Some men ignored repeated orders to abandon their ships. They refused to leave while fellow sailors were still trapped below deck. At Battleship Row, the attack grew even more devastating. USS Oklahoma was struck by multiple torpedoes in rapid succession. The massive battleship began listing heavily to one side. Within only a few minutes, she rolled completely over. Hundreds of sailors became trapped inside the overturned hull. Some survived for days in small air pockets, desperately tapping on the steel with hammers, hoping someone outside could hear them. For many, rescue never came in time. Nearby, USS West Virginia absorbed several torpedo hits and quickly began sinking into the shallow harbor. Her crew continued fighting fires even as the deck slowly disappeared beneath the water. But nothing compared to what was about to happen aboard USS Arizona. The battleship had already been hit by several bombs when, at approximately 8:06 a.m., a Japanese armor-piercing bomb penetrated deep into the ship. Seconds later, it reached the forward ammunition magazine. Then, everything changed. A tremendous explosion ripped through the center of the vessel. The blast was so powerful that it lifted the battleship from the water. A towering fireball erupted into the sky. Steel weighing several tons was thrown hundreds of feet into the air. The shock wave spread across the harbor with incredible force. Nearby sailors were knocked off their feet. Windows shattered across the base. The explosion could be heard miles away. In less than 10 seconds, more than 1,000 men aboard USS Arizona were dead. Many never even knew what had happened. Today, it remains one of the deadliest single moments in American naval history. The burning wreck continued to blaze for more than 2 days. Even now, more than 80 years later, the ship still rests beneath the waters of Pearl Harbor. Tiny drops of oil continue to escape from the wreck. Visitors often watch them slowly rise to the surface in complete silence. Many have come to call them the Black Tears of the Arizona. While the harbor burned, another remarkable story was unfolding nearby. A young sailor named Doris Miller had been assigned to kitchen duty aboard USS West Virginia. He was not trained to operate anti-aircraft weapons. In fact, because of segregation in the United States Navy at the time, black sailors like Miller were rarely given combat assignments. When the attack began, he first helped carry wounded sailors to safety. Then, seeing that many gun crews had been killed or injured, he climbed behind a .50 caliber machine gun he had never officially been trained to use. Ignoring the danger around him, Miller opened fire on the attacking aircraft. Witnesses later recalled seeing him continue firing calmly as bombs exploded nearby and bullets struck the ship around him. His bravery made him one of the first African-American heroes of the Second World War. For his actions that morning, Doris Miller received the Navy Cross. His courage became a symbol of determination under impossible circumstances. Across the harbor, similar acts of heroism unfolded everywhere. Doctors operated without electricity. Nurses treated patients while explosions continued around them. Mechanics struggled to move surviving aircraft away from burning hangars. Pilots climbed into damaged fighters, hoping to get airborne before the next wave arrived. Some succeeded. Many never had the chance. The battle was no longer about stopping the attack. It had become a desperate struggle simply to survive. And above the smoke-filled harbor, another formation of Japanese aircraft was already approaching. The second wave had arrived. The second wave of Japanese aircraft reached Pearl Harbor shortly before 9 a.m. By then, enormous columns of black smoke could be seen from miles away. The harbor was burning. Oil covered the surface of the water. Flames spread from ship to ship, turning the once peaceful naval base into a scene of unimaginable destruction. For the Japanese pilots arriving with the second wave, the success of the first attack was immediately obvious. Many of the largest battleships were already crippled. Airfields were in flames. American anti-aircraft defenses, however, were no longer silent. The first shock had passed. Sailors, soldiers, Marines, and airmen had begun fighting back. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire from every direction. Bright orange bursts filled the sky. Heavy machine guns rattled across the harbor. Every available weapon was brought into action. The sky became a deadly maze of smoke, shrapnel, and tracer fire. Japanese pilots who had expected another easy pass suddenly found themselves flying through a storm of exploding shells. Several aircraft were hit. Others disappeared into the smoke and never returned. Although surprised, the American defenders were becoming increasingly organized with every passing minute. On the ground, rescue operations continued without pause. Men climbed across twisted steel and burning wreckage, searching for survivors. Some used their bare hands to lift debris. Others crawled through smoke-filled compartments where visibility had nearly disappeared. Every rescued sailor was a small victory against the chaos surrounding them. Inside overturned ships, trapped crew members continued pounding desperately against the steel hulls. The sound echoed through the harbor. Rescue teams listened carefully, marking every location where they heard someone still alive. For hours, they cut through thick armor plate using torches and heavy equipment. Some sailors were pulled to safety. Many others were reached too late. The harbor itself had become almost as dangerous as the attack. Burning fuel floated across the water. Men forced to abandon their ships often found themselves swimming through flames. Some suffered severe burns before reaching shore. Others disappeared beneath the smoke-covered surface and were never seen again. The courage displayed that morning would later become legendary. Lieutenant Commander Fuchida, observing the devastation from above, knew the mission had achieved remarkable success. The American battleship force had suffered catastrophic damage. Aircraft lay destroyed across multiple airfields. Fuel fires continued spreading throughout the base. Yet one important objective remained incomplete: Japan's primary targets had included America's aircraft carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, USS Saratoga. These ships represented the future of naval warfare. Unlike battleships, aircraft carriers could project power hundreds of miles away through their aircraft alone. Destroying them would have dealt a far more serious blow to America's long-term ability to fight in the Pacific. But on December 7th, fate intervened. None of the three carriers were in Pearl Harbor. USS Enterprise was returning from delivering aircraft to Wake Island. USS Lexington was transporting fighters toward Midway. USS Saratoga was undergoing maintenance on the American mainland. Japanese reconnaissance crews searched in vain. The carriers simply were not there. It was a disappointment that would haunt Japanese planners long after the attack ended. Another crucial opportunity was also missed. Pearl Harbor contained enormous fuel storage facilities capable of supplying the entire Pacific Fleet. Nearby repair docks could restore damaged warships far more quickly than expected. Machine shops, submarine facilities, and logistical warehouses remained largely untouched. Several Japanese officers later argued that a third attack should have been launched to destroy these strategic targets. Doing so might have delayed America's recovery by many months. But Admiral Chuichi Nagumo faced an impossible decision. His pilots had already flown 2 exhausting combat missions. American anti-aircraft fire was becoming increasingly effective. No one knew where the missing American aircraft carriers might appear. Remaining near Hawaii for too long risked turning victory into disaster. Nagumo chose to withdraw. Shortly before noon, the Japanese fleet began turning back toward Japan. The attack was over. The silence that followed felt almost unreal. Where organized rows of battleships had stood only hours earlier, thick smoke now drifted across the harbor. Burning metal creaked. Explosions from secondary ammunition fires echoed through the afternoon. Thousands of exhausted survivors wandered among shattered buildings, searching for missing friends, brothers, fathers, and shipmates. Many still refused to believe what had happened. America had been attacked. Not somewhere across the ocean, not on a distant battlefield, but on American soil. Within just 2 hours, the United States had suffered one of the greatest military disasters in its history. Yet, despite the enormous destruction, the attack had failed to achieve Japan's most important strategic objective. America had been wounded. It had not been defeated. And within hours, that difference would begin to change the course of the entire war. As the smoke continued rising above Pearl Harbor, news of the attack spread across the United States with astonishing speed. Telephone lines became overwhelmed. Radio stations interrupted their regular broadcasts. Extra editions of newspapers rushed to the streets. Families gathered around their radios in disbelief, trying to understand what had happened. Many refused to believe the first reports. How could a nation protected by 2 vast oceans have been attacked so suddenly? Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, casualty reports continued to grow. Ships had been sunk. Airfields had been devastated. Thousands of service members were dead or wounded. Hospitals across Hawaii worked without rest. Doctors performed surgeries for hours without stopping. Nurses treated patients wherever they could find space. School buildings, churches, and community centers were transformed into emergency medical facilities. Outside, volunteers lined up to donate blood. Inside the White House, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was already preparing one of the most important speeches of his presidency. His advisors gathered around maps and military reports arriving from Hawaii. The situation was becoming clearer by the hour. The attack had not been an accident. It had not been a misunderstanding. It was a carefully planned act of war. Roosevelt understood that every word he spoke the next day would shape the nation's response. He carefully reviewed the opening sentence again and again. One draft originally described December 7th as a date which will live in world history. Roosevelt quietly crossed out those words. In their place, he wrote a single word that would echo through history: infamy. The following afternoon, December 8, 1941, members of Congress filled the chamber. The atmosphere was unlike anything most of them had ever experienced. Many lawmakers still carried newspapers describing the destruction at Pearl Harbor. Others had spent the entire night receiving reports from military commanders. As Roosevelt approached the podium, the room fell completely silent. Despite recovering from the effects of polio, he stood with remarkable determination. Then he began speaking. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The speech lasted only a little more than 7 minutes. There were no dramatic gestures, no unnecessary emotion, only calm determination. Roosevelt described the attack as deliberate. He explained that diplomatic negotiations had continued even while the Japanese fleet was already sailing toward Hawaii. To many Americans, this detail made the attack feel even more shocking. Before the applause had fully ended, Congress voted almost unanimously to declare war on Japan. Only one representative voted against the resolution. Within days, Germany and Italy honored their alliance with Japan by declaring war on the United States. America immediately responded with declarations of its own. The Second World War had entered an entirely new chapter. Factories that had once produced automobiles now manufactured tanks and aircraft. Civilian industries shifted to wartime production at astonishing speed. Millions of young Americans volunteered or were drafted into military service. Shipyards worked day and night. Aircraft rolled off assembly lines in numbers the world had never seen before. The industrial power Admiral Yamamoto had feared was finally awakening. Ironically, the very attack designed to keep America out of the Pacific had achieved the opposite. Instead of breaking American resolve, Pearl Harbor united the nation with extraordinary determination. Recruitment offices filled with volunteers. War bond campaigns attracted millions of supporters. Communities collected scrap metal, rubber, and other materials needed for the war effort. The attack had transformed public opinion almost overnight. For Japan, the immediate military victory had been undeniable. Several American battleships had been sunk or heavily damaged. Hundreds of aircraft had been destroyed. Thousands of lives had been lost. Yet beneath those impressive tactical successes, a dangerous reality remained. The American aircraft carriers had escaped. The massive fuel reserves still stood. The repair facilities remained operational. Most importantly, America's ability to replace its losses far exceeded Japan's. The attack had wounded a giant. It had not defeated one. Admiral Yamamoto himself reportedly understood this painful truth. Although historians continue to debate the exact wording, he is often associated with a haunting observation. "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant." Whether those exact words were spoken or not, The idea reflected a reality that soon became impossible to ignore. The months that followed proved just how much the world had changed on that quiet Sunday morning. Across the Pacific, the war expanded with astonishing speed. Japanese forces captured territory after territory. Hong Kong fell. Singapore surrendered. The Philippines became another brutal battlefield. For a time, it seemed as though the Empire of Japan was unstoppable. But beneath the surface, something even more powerful was taking shape. American shipyards worked around the clock. Factories that had once built refrigerators, automobiles, and farm equipment now produced bombers, tanks, aircraft carriers, and warships in numbers the world had never witnessed before. Entire communities reorganized their lives around the war effort. Women entered factories by the millions. Families planted victory gardens. Children collected scrap metal. Every citizen became part of the struggle. The attack on Pearl Harbor had united an entire nation with a single purpose. Only 6 months later, that determination would face its first great test. In June 1942, near a tiny Pacific island called Midway, American code breakers successfully uncovered Japan's next major offensive. This time, there would be no surprise. This time, the United States would be waiting. The Battle of Midway lasted only 4 days, yet its consequences would shape the remainder of the Pacific War. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the very heart of the fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor, were destroyed. Many of Japan's most experienced naval aviators were lost forever. It was a devastating blow from which the Imperial Japanese Navy would never fully recover. The balance of the war had begun to shift. From that moment forward, Japan increasingly fought to defend what it had already conquered, while the United States steadily pushed westward across the Pacific. Island by island, beach by beach, the cost was enormous. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each name represented another chapter written in sacrifice. Millions of soldiers and civilians would lose their lives before the conflict finally came to an end. In August 1945, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were devastated by atomic bombs. Days later, Japan announced its surrender. The Second World War was finally over. Looking back, historians have often asked the same question. Was Pearl Harbor a brilliant tactical success? Or was it one of history's greatest strategic mistakes? The answer may be both. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japan achieved almost complete surprise. American battleships burned. Aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Thousands of lives were lost within only 2 hours. Yet the attack failed to destroy America's aircraft carriers. It failed to eliminate the massive fuel reserves that kept the Pacific Fleet operating. It failed to cripple the repair facilities that quickly returned damaged ships to service. And perhaps most importantly, it failed to break the spirit of the American people. Instead, it awakened a nation whose industrial strength and determination would eventually reshape the outcome of the war. Today, more than 80 years later, Pearl Harbor remains a place of remembrance rather than anger. The waters are calm once again. The sound of explosions has long since faded. White memorials stand where burning battleships once fought for survival. Visitors from every corner of the world arrive in silence. Many pause above the USS Arizona Memorial, looking down through the clear water toward the ship that still rests beneath the harbor floor. Tiny drops of oil continue to rise slowly to the surface. Some call them the black tears of the Arizona. A quiet reminder that history never truly disappears. It simply waits for those willing to remember it. Pearl Harbor was never only the story of war. It was the story of ordinary people whose lives changed forever in a single morning. Young sailors who would never return home. Pilots who believed they were changing history. Doctors and nurses who refused to stop saving lives. Families who received letters that would become their final connection to someone they loved. History is often measured in years, sometimes in decades. But every so often, the course of the world changes in a single day. On December 7, 1941, that day arrived. The smoke eventually cleared. The ships were rebuilt. The war came to an end. But the lessons of Pearl Harbor never faded. Because peace is often at its most fragile just before history changes forever.